Today is the day you learn Twinmotion. What's going on, guys? My name's Tomic. I'm a registered architect here in Western Australia, and today I'm going to be showing you the complete suite of Twinmotion 2023 and explaining everything in intricate detail so you as an absolute beginner can be a pro by the end of this video. Now obviously, if you're going to be using Twinmotion, you're going to need to have Twinmotion installed. So go ahead, jump on Google, type in Epic Games, download the Epic Games downloader, and we're going to be able to open and download Twinmotion. So from the home screen of Epic Games, you jump across to the top tab where it says Twinmotion and simply hit launch. Once Twinmotion 2023 opens up, you have a variety of options to choose from. Let's go with the most basic and just start a new scene. What you see in 2023 is the brand new UI. Now, this UI is arguably somewhat more complicated than the last one, but it does give you a lot more details. So let's break it down. The left-hand side is going to be your working palette. All of your materials, your object, your lighting is going to be on this left-hand panel. If you want to toggle it on and off, down the bottom right-hand side, you're going to have your library panel, so you can just toggle it as you see fit. Directly next to that panel, you're going to have a statistics panel that shows you the operating power of your computer. So if Twinmotion is crashing continuously, you're probably working your computer way too hard, and you can keep an eye on this. However, I don't see much point to that, so I keep that closed. Up the top, we have another toolbar that is generally just for movement and orientation. The most important one up the top is this material picker, and you're probably going to use that the most out of everything up the top. The rest, you can work your way through with keyboard shortcuts. Just in the top right-hand corner of the working screen, you have full screen mode, and you also have the I button. The I button basically allows you to change time of day. It gives you the shortcuts to the speed settings when you move around with the camera. So numbers 1 through to 6 increase and decrease the speed accordingly. You can take a quick screenshot if you need to render out. You can go to pedestrian or drone mode, and you can also do VR. You have a few different views and a cross section. Also the navigator down the bottom. Most of these items you don't really need to use throughout your experience, only if you're trying to change some intricate details. Now on the right hand side, you're going to see your secondary navigator. The very top is your scene navigator. You're able to toggle on and off any individual scene or any individual material and object. You can also simply select them from here, press the delete button to remove them completely. Command or Control Z or Z, wherever you are around the world, lets you undo that last command just like any other program you might be using. If we come back to our material picker up the top and select our favorite little material down here visible in Twinmotion, it's going to show you what that material is. So at the moment, that material showcased in the middle of our screen is Nightmare Marble, and you have full flexibility and control of this material. So we'll talk through this once, and then we'll get into the intricate detailing of how to actually use Twinmotion. Feel free to skip ahead in this timeline if you already know all about the materials and how to adjust them perfectly to your desired requirements. First of all, we have our material up the top, and then we have our color selection. If we wanted to adjust the primary underlying color of the material, we can select the color, open up the color picker, and then adjust it as we see fit. So let's say we wanted to make it a deeper red, a deeper purple, whatever we wanted, we could change that by simply changing the hues of the underlying tones. I'm going to simply cancel that for now. Moving across to Grange. Grange basically introduces a few different elements of weathering and texturing. So if I press the W, A, S, and D keys to move forward, back, left, or right, we can fly in closer to this little ball and experience this in a high quality texture. So let's move ever so close to this ball. If I increase the Grange, you will see some slight texturing and some slight weathering of the marble. Now marble is obviously a very tough material, so there's not going to be too much weathering. But let's say we come across to our materials, go to concrete, simply drag and drop a base concrete on there, and then change the Grange. You're going to see a lot more discoloration, a lot more aging, and basically dirt on the product. So Command Z gets us all the way back to where we were before. Luminosity basically increases the brightness or dullness of the material and underlying object. So if we wanted to make it basically black, take away all the detail, we push it down to 0. If we wanted to increase the brightness and just make it a little bit more punchy, we can bring it up to 100. You can also tap on anything to just reduce that simply down to 50, 60, whatever percent you need. If you need to work in through more details, you can tap the details button, change the actual texture from something that you've downloaded off the internet. Just simply go open and you can select a new texture from the UV maps you have downloaded. You can adjust the saturation, gamma, lift and grain. All sliders, very simple to use. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. Next, we've got our UV category, which basically allows you to rotate the material, increase the scale of the material, and also go into the finer details, stretch it on one axis, 2 axes, move it, spread it, speed it, do whatever you need. Speed is an interesting one, mainly used for beacons, moving parts, water, things like that. It lets you adjust the material so it actually moves in one direction. If you wanted to create maybe like a waterfall effect over this ball, you could use this as well. So now we'll turn that back down to 0 and move on. Roughness, pretty self-explanatory. Drag it up and down, increase the smoothness or roughness. 0% makes it quite shiny, 100% makes it extremely rough. Granite ideally sits somewhere in the middle, bit of a stain protector over the top. Metallicness, exactly what it says, increase, decrease, to increase the shine of the material itself. Both roughness and metallic have their own textures, so if you are changing the materials, make sure you go through, open up the correct textures and import them one by one into these spaces as well. We have a few more categories down the bottom, but for a beginner tutorial, this is probably going a little bit too far. The only thing you might want to look at is X-ray, and if you turn X-ray on, it basically just allows you to see through the object. It isn't too useful for a beginner at all, but it is there as a choice. Inside miscellaneous, one of my favorite features is the 2-sided object. So if you have an object that is complicated curves, complicated geometry, maybe a gutter or a sink, you can simply turn on 2-sided to make sure that texture covers every single element of it. So 2-sided on this will do absolutely nothing, but if you seem to be missing some textures here and there, make sure you tick 2-sided. The sounds down the bottom become quite critical and quite important when you're doing 3D videos and exporting noise from Twinmotion. However, I don't find too much value in them because if you're doing a video, you're exporting it into Premiere Pro, and then after that, you're actually adding your custom sounds one by one. And there you have it. Now we've covered all of the basics and the UI of Twinmotion. So let's actually import a real life project and start working on it, adding materials, textures, grass, the works. I will make this project available to all of you. I'll simply leave it in the description down below. I'll make it 100% free so you can all experience this and learn step by step. So feel free to download that project right now, import it into Twinmotion, and keep going with this tutorial. Okay, so now that we have our model imported, we're gonna start adding some textures, some materials, and enhancing the background and environment. I like to set up the first scene. That way we can understand what we're trying to articulate, the lighting, the mood, and everything around it. So let's start by coming across to our HDR environments, selecting skies. Personally, I like morning and mid-afternoon. I like cloudy, and one of my favorites is the morning cloudy 16. Now, obviously there's hundreds of options here, but all you have to do is download one that you like, drag and drop it onto the sky. It will then create that background and that texture and change the entire lighting environment. If we make sure we're selecting ambience at the top, we can scroll down to our HDR environment and then adjust as we see fit. So at the moment, the sun is coming in from the left-hand side of the screen, or I can adjust the rotation to however I see fit and more appropriate for this scene. So let's say I like maybe some 24-degree rotation, and then I can adjust the intensity as well. So the intensity is going to adjust the actual sky. It isn't going to adjust too many other things, but it will change the entire environment. What you want to do is make sure that sky is approximately the same intensity as the overall scene itself. So this is quite a bright and vibrant scene, so I'm going to increase that to about 6.35. Now, pro tip, if you want to replace this background with an environment that actually works, something realistic off Google, there's one very easy and quick way you can do it. So let's simply jump across to Google Maps, grab your little man, drop him anywhere in the world, wherever there's a scene. Then you want to copy this entire URL. So whatever environment you've selected that you need, copy that URL. You're then going to need a program called Street View Download 360. I'll share this in the description down below as well. Once you've downloaded and installed it, it's going to look something like this. All you need to do is paste that URL into the file, select your path destination, and change the resolution as you see fit. The higher the resolution, the longer this process is going to take, and the downloader from a JPEG to a HDRI is a little bit slow, so I do like to stick to about the 6,000 mark and not go too far. Once you've found your specific space, you can jump across to Convertio, which allows you to upload the JPEG exported from the Street Viewer. So let's drag and drop our Street Viewer copy, and then we can change this to HDR, click OK, and click Convert, download that into our project. So coming back into Twinmotion, let's say you've completed all of those steps, found a site that you love, converted it to a HDR, you can come to this preview, open, and select a new map. So from the downloads file, I've selected that map that it's downloaded. It's going to load this HDRI in the background. And as you can see, it's loaded a real life scenario from a 360 camera in Google Maps. Now it's messed with our entire lighting scene and everything in between. So we're going to readjust our intensity and our rotation to perfectly align with what we need. So now we've aligned our rotation, we want to come into details, and we do not want to lock our sun with our HDRI. Generally speaking, I would advise locking it because it really ties that image together. However, in this case, I just don't think it is appropriate. So now that we've unlocked our sun and our sky rotation, we can come back up to our exposure controls at the very top for global lighting, come down to details to adjust as we need to. So at the moment, I have exposure compensation turned on and at -1. If I untick that, I can adjust my exposure completely and freely. This is quite useful in interior shots, but for this specific photo, we're going to keep exposure compensation on and reduce that back down to -1. What you will notice as well is this image right now that we're modeling is a little bit too warm, a little bit too yellow in comparison to the background. So I'm going to adjust my white balance just a little bit lower, a little bit cooler, to tie that in and make it look like it actually blends with our environment. So we're making this image significantly cooler. Let's go 6,000 kelvins. Should be approximately right. We can tweak that later. Now we've moved quite far pretty quickly, and we have a somewhat realistic environment coming together quite nicely. Now it's time to start importing some textures, some overlays, some plants, and everything in between to make this really pop. Now, I like this setup, I like how it's working, so what I'm going to do is fly around a little bit, come down to the bottom UI media map, which I specifically ignored at the start because it has everything to do with how you model and interact. What we're going to do is we're going to firstly open up our media tab. Now we've got our media mode open, we can simply click the plus button to create our very first image. Now our image is set up by default to the Twinmotion default settings. What we want to do is come across to our camera and start messing with our focal lengths to see where we really like it. Personally, I like a 35mm focal length. I believe it makes it look a little bit more punched in, a little bit more realistic. So that's why I personally opt for about 35mm wherever possible. I don't mess around with the depth of field or anything else because it tends to make life a little bit too hard. So now that we've set up 35mm, we want to come back across to our image and hit the refresh button. That's going to save those settings we've adjusted. If for whatever reason we move around, adjust it, change it, don't like the settings we've done, we can simply double click on our image and it will come back directly to where we saved it. Be cautious, once you change these settings, they're automatically applied. It only has to do with the camera angles and the materials you've highlighted and selected toggled on and off. Now coming across to our render, we can either do real-time path tracer, depending on the quality of your machine, is going to dictate if these are active or not for you. To make this seem a little bit more realistic, we want to soften these shadows. So you can see these shadows are quite harsh across our building, and they will be as we add more materials and textures and objects. So I like to increase the shadow depth just over 1,000 to make them nice and soft. The shadow bias can also be increased and decreased. I like to make my scenes a little bit darker, a little bit more moody, so I do drop the shadow bias ever so slightly. Moving across to our effects, this is all personal opinion and subject to how you like to see your images. I like to drop my saturation down to about 40%, just so it takes away all those overpowering colors that make it look like a render. I then like to increase my contrast to about 55, 60, to give it a bit of punch and a bit of kick. I do adjust all of this later on in Lightroom. If you do want to do that as well, you can most certainly. but this is a very nice way to get an easy exported image. Last but not least, we do want to change our output size on our very first image that we create. That way you don't have to go through and select each individual image to change the output size. Go to whatever the maximum your computer allows you to get the best quality render. So let's go 8K in this instance to make sure we get the best possible quality. If you're just exporting to get the idea in the image, simply drop it back down to 2K so you're not waiting forever for this to export. However, that is basically all of the settings there are to set up one of your first media modes. We can use all of these same skills to come across to the video a little bit later on, but let's start implementing some beautiful materials to make it look just that little bit better. So let's dive back to our library up the top. Go to materials and start applying some little bits and pieces. First of all, I want this timber to be black. I don't want it to be gray. I simply applied a white and gray color palette to this entire model just so you can see a complete transformation. For me personally, I can go to the material picker and select that material because it is already a timber walnut finish. I can then change my color to a nice black. Now, obviously this scene is quite dark. I don't want it to be blacked out completely with no texture. So I do need to adjust it to the scene specifically. And that's exactly the reason why you want to set up your lighting and your camera angles first. So let's adjust this to a nice charcoal black. Somewhere about here is perfect. I'm going to press OK. I do want a little bit of grange, some aging, some weathering on that material. I don't need it to be as bright. So I'm going to take that luminance down and I'm going to increase the roughness to about 75% because it is timber, it is a natural material, it is meant to be rough. Coming back to our material, let's go materials and start with the glass. The latest version of Twinmotion 2023 has had a massive improvement on all its materials and glass, which is great because now we have better quality selections to choose from. Personally, I like the reflective glass on the actual glass itself. Now, you'll see this panel is a little bit different. That's because these windows are actually louver windows. So they're reflecting at a completely different angle and they're reflecting the background of whatever this house is. Now our pool in the middle, I've specifically made it a different glass texture. I'm gonna make that clear glass so we can see what's going on inside our pool. We'll come back to how we can add water into this space and make it very realistic as we move forward. Coming back to our materials, we wanna go to our ground and start adding some greenery, some nature. So let's go into nature and select one of our grass textures to apply to the surrounds. Personally, I like grass 5 because it's a little bit darker, a little bit more moody and brings that image together. Again, completely up to you what images and textures you select. We're going to fly up a little bit and also see our planters in here have a different texture applied. So we want to change that to a nice dirt or mud finish. Let's use the generic dirt image. Let's make that a little bit darker so it looks a bit more like mulch rather than just plain dirt. Our driveway is definitely a man-made object and not a natural object. So we're going to come back into our palette and select something a little bit different. Let's say we want an old school cobblestone driveway to really make this house look expensive, modern, and elegant. So let's drag, drop that. Completely changes the entire environment. If I double click on image 1, we can see it's changed ever so slightly. I can take my material picker, adjust it, increase the luminosity to make it a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter, and there we go. It ties it back in so beautifully. Now, these bare concrete retaining walls, I do actually want to keep them as bare concrete retaining walls, but I want a little bit of a nicer bare concrete. So let's come back into our concrete, drag it back over, increase to make it a nice bright white. Give it a little bit of grange because it is going to age, it is going to weather. Nothing stays perfect and pristine forever. Next, we want to come back into our materials, take our brushed aluminium, drop it onto our window frames, adjust the color down to a nice black monument, deep dark tone. Press OK. And slowly we're starting to get an image forming. Now we want to fly up a little bit to see what else is going on. We can see our pool tiles a little bit boring, a little bit gray, and they need to have that blue tinge to really bring out that water. So let's come back to our materials, find some beautiful tiles, scroll down to the bottom, mosaic blue, there we go. We have blue tiles sitting inside our beautiful pool. Now obviously this pool is empty. We want to make it something special, we want to add some water to it. So let's come back to our library palette. Let's go to objects, let's go to water and select our water cube. And we can now start adjusting it to fit this pool. So now that we've selected this water cube, we can press the tab button to open up different settings. So tabbing through them, first of all, we have our movement in all directions, we have our adjustment and scale tool, and we have our movement in just one single direction. So I'm going to tab across until I have my adjustment tool. If you don't want to press tab continuously, these options do change up the top here in this navigator. So if you simply are on the wrong one, you can just tap across to where you need to be. Now we're going to select each one of these little nodes to adjust this pool to exactly the right length as we need it. And there we go. We've adjusted our pool to the right depth, to the right size and scale. And if we want to change our appearance of our pool, let's say we want a darker or a more blue tinge, we can simply select that cube and change our appearances here. Now our image is starting to come together, but it needs some life. It needs some character. At the moment, it's just an architectural piece in the middle of nowhere. So let's come back out to our library. Let's go to vegetation. Let's go to trees first of all, and let's input a few trees on the side, left and right, so we can actually get them. Let's select any tree that you personally like, and let's drop in a tree on the left, and let's drop another tree in on the right. So now if we select our image one, we'll see these trees are in our scene, but not perfectly aligned. So we first select our left tree. Let's push our left tree back ever so slightly, double click. I like the placement of that tree. I'm happy with the placement of that tree. Select our right tree, come back across. Using our mouse, right clicking to pan around, obviously, we can rotate this tree to how we need it to be. Let's say we just want it ever so slightly hovering over this building. If we select this tree, it'll change some of our settings on the right hand side. We can increase the age, let it grow, or let it shrink as well. And we can also change the seasons individually and independently. So if we wanted that tree to look like it was in the middle of autumn, we could simply do that. However, I keep it on auto, so if you adjust the weather, all the trees adjust at the same time. We can continue adding all sorts of shrubs into this environment by simply coming back to our vegetation, selecting shrubs. Let's add 1 or 2 base bushes around our trees so it looks like they're just growing out of nature. We can see that starting to blend in with the environment now, which is beautiful. The grass at the moment is very 2D, very basic. There is 2 ways we can go around adding beautiful 3D textured grass in Twinmotion. We come across to our populate panel down the very bottom. We select foliage. We can either paint it on with a paintbrush and simply go through every little bit, or we can do our scatter tool. So our scatter tool, very simple to use. Back to vegetation, grass, drag and drop any of the grass that you see fit. Select that material, select the scatter tool, and then click a couple times on the green patch. So as you'll see, it'll create 3D textured grass very quickly, and you can adjust the scale of it as you require. If you want to fine tune it a little bit because it's growing over our curb, you can select the eraser tool, reduce our diameter down to 0.5 of a meter, and then erase just the little bits that are overgrown and you don't need to see them. If we wanted to continue, add a few more background trees, let's grab this Australian pine, drop it in the background, maybe over here, and then another one just over here, coming back into our scene. We can see them blending in. So I don't want that one there. I'm going to move it ever so slightly across so we can still see this tree growing, moving in the background, and I'm going to adjust the one on the other side as well. It's kind of how it hide a very blurry 3D house from Google. Now the difference between a very basic render and a very nice professional render is the environment, the scenery, and the suns and shadows. You can see we've set our suns and shadows to come from the left hand side of our screen over our building, which means anything on the other side of the street will also cast a shadow onto the street. At the moment, the street is boring, bland, and just a big concrete slab. So let's fly back around, select our Australian pine tree, and let's add a couple of these pine trees into our scene. We also want to add maybe a couple smaller trees in between to cast some different shadows. So double clicking, now you can see that street has become a little bit more accentuated, a little bit more beautiful. If we come back to our ambience, go to our environment, we can then offset our location to adjust how those trees fall on the street and how those shadows are cast. So I like them sweeping across the entire street. It makes it look quite nice, quite beautiful. Now, instead of going into our materials palette, we're going to select Megascans. Megascans is a free import into Twinmotion that has so many more features, so many more surfaces. So let's select surfaces, go down to asphalt. Let's go into fine and pick one asphalt that we see fit for this project. I'm simply going to select fine asphalt, let it download, and drag and drop it onto our road. Now that road is a beautiful dark black asphalt. You can see some textures rotating around the wrong way. So we're going to rotate that asphalt 90 degrees. We're going to definitely increase the grainage of this because roads are dirty, filthy, and have lots of weathering, decrease our luminosity, and increase our roughness. Now that we have our pitch black, brand new asphalt road, we're going to come back to our library, go to our objects, select decals. Now I'm simply going to use the dash markings tool in the middle of our scene, perfectly in the middle there, and then I'm going to use a line marking right at the edge of this curb. Hover over the green arrow to allow it to move left and right. Hold the shift button, drag it across to where we see fit, let go, and it will allow us to copy it. If we want to copy the instance, which basically means if we ever change any of the materials or selections of that one, it'll change all of them, or it allows us to copy it directly. If we copy it, we can change each individual material individually. So for this, it's an instance for me. I don't see any changes required. I want to have at least 3 of them copied so it comes across the whole street. Press OK, escape, and you'll see that beautiful white line created along the entire road itself. If we want to add a little bit more texture and depth to the scene, we can add a little sewer in the bottom right or left corner as if we were standing on the other curb. We can then continue to scroll down, add a little puddle next to that, and there we go. We've got some texture in the foreground, some texture in the background. It's all starting to slowly come together. Now this building needs a lot more to actually give it some punch and some kick. These planters on the left-hand side were designed to be just that, planters with cascading plants and a beautiful feature in the middle here. However, at the moment, they're just big boxes of dirt. So what we need to do is actually populate them with some beautiful plants. There are 4 ways we can actually populate this right here. First of all, we can go to Vegetation and select trees and shrubs individually. Secondly, we can go into Megascans, go to 3D plants, and again, populate that individually. We can go to Sketchfab and basically access an online public resource of libraries, textures, materials, plants. Or last but not least, we can actually import directly an FBX model from any supplier. So let's go ahead and actually import an FBX model as a feature into this project. So we want to come down to the bottom import doc, click the import button and open up a geometry. I've downloaded some grass trees in the past, which is a very Australian plant that we can use in this project. So we have a series of different grass trees. Simply select the FBX, press open and allow it to import. When prompted, we want to use the imported materials, not the scene materials. The imported materials of an FBX file are those high quality textures specific to this. So make sure you select imported materials, press OK. Now when importing an FBX, it throws it to the random 00 point in your project. So come across to your navigator, select that plant, find where it has dropped it in. Make sure you hover over the large ball in the middle, drag it into your environment. So let's say we want this one approximately here, and then I'm going to repeat this process to add all of those other grass trees in. So we have our grass trees imported, we can repeat this process and basically align the grass trees where we actually want them to go. So let's just drag and drop a few grass trees wherever we really see fit. This grass tree looks to be the biggest one, so it's definitely going to be my feature grass tree. I'll move this other one back and I can duplicate it the same way as before. Select any one of these material objects, hold shift, duplicate the instance. I'm going to repeat this step a few more times to basically populate my grass trees in between the entire space. And now we have a beautiful variety of grass trees growing in our planters. We also want to populate this with a few little vines, a little creepers, some bits and pieces from our bush selection. So I'm going to go through that quickly, populate that, and then come back. Now inside Megascans in our 3D plant selection, we also have some climbers to choose from. So if we want to actually grab some climbers around this retaining wall, we can download a few of these options to actually be able to implement some beautiful climbers. Now we've populated our climbers, we've populated our plants. I'll take a quick moment here just to refer you to the description box down below. There is a series of great links and resources, including a free Discord chat, which basically hosts a community of architects, designers, and students in the architectural profession all around the world looking to grow and enhance their skills. So if you believe you fit into this community, feel free to hit that Discord link and join it 100% for free. We can start working on the lighting and the detail inside of this project. So let's come back out into our library, let's fly into our building and select our lights. I like to use the area light because it floods the entire space first of all. So let's drag and drop an area light into this space, fly around, make sure it is perfectly aligned to our first space, and repeat that a few times across. So now internally that is flooded with natural light and it's starting to glow. Repeat that same step in this bedroom over here. And then we want to add some actual 3D lights. So let's go back to Sketchfab. Let's try type in downlight and see what we can find. Dragging and dropping that into our actual project, allowing it to create. Tapping the F key on your keyboard to find it, we'll see it is incredibly large. So let's make that 0.1 and 0.1 again. Tap the F key to find it once again. It is still way too big, so 0.1, and now we're starting to actually get it to the appropriate size that it needs to be. We can tab and readjust it to suit. There we go. Now we have our first little downlight sitting on our concrete. We just want to adjust it perfectly to where it needs to sit. Once we place our first downlight, we can copy and paste these across quite easily. So we have our first downlight. I'm going to adjust it to somewhere approximately over here in the project. Then I'm going to come out of my Sketchfab, make sure I go back to my materials library, select materials, scroll to the bottom, select neons, and drag and drop neon number 2 onto that downlight. Now that downlight will have its own little glow and look very realistic. I also want to copy and paste the material from the window frame onto the actual downlight, so we have a black fixture that is very noticeable and very visible. Finally, I want to come across to my library, go to my lights, spotlight, and drop one spotlight directly above that light. So if I pan out a little bit, select my spotlight, you can see it is quite bright, quite overpowering. So I'm going to reduce the lumiance from 300 to 100 so it isn't too bright. Select my downlight and my spotlight, hold shift, drag it across. Let's say one copy every 3 meters, okay. Then select both of those downlights and fly out of my building. I'm then going to replicate it every 2 meters for approximately 5 meters, press OK. And now you'll see we have spotlights throughout our entire building itself. I want to do the same procedure in this little space over here because that's all we can see from our first image. There we go. If we come back to our image 1, we'll see our downlights inside our building. It's starting to look a little bit more real. It's starting to look a bit realistic. I do also want to add 2 textured LED strips into this soffit of the building. So I can go ahead and try find an LED strip perfect for that, or I come into library, go to primitive objects, select my box, drag and drop the box in, scale it to approximately the size I need, add the neon texture to it just like we did for those downlights, and then drag it and drop it into our soffit and scale it appropriately. So I don't need that to be perfect, but I do need it to be quite good. So I'm going to scale it about there, align it to the center, copy and paste it to the other side. Make sure I select copy this time instead of instance, so I'm not messing with all of the shapes that I've created at once. Readjust and copy once more to get the front LED working. And there we have it. Now we have our internal lighting, we have our downlights, we have our neon strip lights, and we have our external scene pretty much set up, ready to go. Now we can continue this entire process for the furniture, for the characters, the people. We can add some life, some actual vibrance to this scene. We can also do that for our vehicles. So if we come back out to Sketchfab, go to our cars and vehicles, you see I've downloaded a few in the past. So let's simply drag and drop this Ferrari into our driveway. Now all we have to do is align the Ferrari correctly and move it to where we need. So now we have a beautiful Ferrari sitting in our driveway, perfectly aligned with this beautiful house, and our first scene completely finished. If we wanted to convert this image into a video, all we simply do is come across to the video tab at the top and pan across to where we want our first scene to start for this 3D video. So let's say we want our 3D video to start from here. Click the plus button, then fly around to our second scene where you want that video to end. Let's say we want it to end about here. select the plus button once again and double click on the start, press the play button. You'll see that video start to form. If we press pause, we can then adjust our video playback speed. Let's say that was a little bit too fast for us. Let's tap 30 seconds, double click on the start, press play again. It'll be a nice, smooth, elegant motion. If you want the camera to continue moving from this one scene, you simply press the add button continuously. However, if you want to make a jump cut to a different space, so let's say we wanted to finish our jump cut in front of this pool, we'll start it right here. We're then going to press a brand new plus button so it starts a whole second part, fly out, drop down to about there, press our plus button, and then if we play from about there, you'll see that instead of moving that camera up to the pool, it'll just jump straight up to that next scene. Now you've done all this hard work, everything's finished, everything's tidied up, you're going to need to export these images and these videos. So how do we do that? It is very easy to export Twinmotion. Simply come across to the export button, press the plus on the image, select the images you want to export, select the plus on the video, select the video you want to export, and scroll to the bottom and press start export. Anyway, that's all for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, there's more Twinmotion tutorials just to the side of me. If you love the content, make sure you smash that subscribe button down below. But like I mentioned, that's all from me. So I'll see you next Monday.